Okay, this video is How to Write Better, Part 3, just some quotes and concepts. And the way this stuff works with quotes is everybody's in a different phase in their writing, and you'll see a quote and it'll just click into something that you need at that moment. You know, some of you might already know all this stuff, but for any writer, it's good to go through all this. Okay, first thing, reduce narrative steps. Yeah, get to the point. Most people who can't write well, they go around and around in circles. That's, again, the benefit of having a conversation first. You'll have known from the conversation what it takes to get to the point. Make it easy for the audience to understand. That just comes from writing an active voice. And again, going with the conversation. That's really the best guide, is that intelligent friend conversation. Okay, here's William Hazlitt, great essayist. He said, "It is a common mistake to suppose that parodies degrade or imply a stigma on the subject. On the contrary, they in general imply something serious or sacred in the originals." And a typical example will be, I'll joke around a lot about Christianity and I'll transpose vegan diet into Christian sayings and principles because I like it. I mean, I wouldn't do that if I didn't like it, because it then carries that religious resonance and emotional echo and strength. Okay, Vladimir Nabokov. He's the one who wrote Lolita. He says, "Satire is a lesson, parody is a game." Okay, so parody is when you're having fun. Satire is a little bit more a lot of times when you're criticizing something. Here's P.J. O'Rourke. "Parody is when you make fun of people who are smarter than you. Satire is when you make fun of people who are richer than you." Okay, J.B. Morton here. "The English are very fond of humor, but they are afraid of wit. For wit is like a sword. Humor is like a jester's bladder." And so, basically a lot of times joking around will sometimes make fun of something, but, it depends on the context. All right, P.J. O'Rourke. "Creative writing teachers should be purged until every last instructor who has uttered the words 'write what you know' is confined to a labor camp. The blind guy with the funny little harp who composed the Iliad, how much combat do you think he saw?" All right, so that gets back to, every writing class that they always say, write what you know. And it's more, write what you're excited about and then go learn it. Anyways, here's another quote from P.J. O'Rourke. "Everything that's fun in life is dangerous. Horse races, for instance, are very dangerous. But if you attempt to design a horse that's safe, the result is a cow. It's impossible to be alive and safe." P.J. O'Rourke had another good quote. I don't know where it is, but he said, "Good humor is fast. It gets to the punchline fast. Because if the joke delays too long, it somehow loses its energy." All right, the next quote, this one's anonymous. "Friction seems more effective at changing people's beliefs than nonfiction. People read nonfiction with their shields up, critical and skeptical. But when absorbed in a story, their guards are down. Humans are not moved by data dumps. They are moved by a story." Anonymous. Okay, so what that reminds me of is the difference between internal medicine lecture and, let's say, a radiology lecture. A typical internal medicine lecture is painful. There's all these tables of data and charts, analysis of the p-value on the paper, and most of it's kind of nonsense. You're talking about, drug A versus B versus C versus D, and they all suck, but one's 5% better. So, versus a good radiology conference, you see a dramatic case, and that picture, you just burn that in your mind and you remember it forever. So that's, like that quote just said, a good story, a good example, that'll stick with you. The other thing, too, you always hear in medicine is, don't go by anecdotal information, go by the papers. That's BS, because anecdotal information is the truth. You talk to your friend, a colleague who's dealt with that situation before, they'll tell you what really happens, what it's like to be in that situation, versus the paper, they're promoting some drug or procedure, trying to sell something. Okay, Ray Bradbury, he's the guy who wrote Fahrenheit 451. He wrote some other good stories too. Here's a quote from him. "Your intuition knows what to write, so get out of the way." Yeah, that's why, again, you're comfortable when you have a conversation with an intelligent friend, so just go with that. Don't try to be too technical about it. Okay, Anne Lamott, she's a good writer. Here's what she says. "You are going to feel like hell if you never write the stuff that is tugging at your sleeve and your heart, your stories, your visions, your memories, your songs, your truth. your version of things in your voice. That's really all you have to offer us, and that is why you were born. So yeah, what she's basically saying is, sometimes you're scared to write something, and rightfully so. You can get in trouble for writing some things. You don't get in trouble for telling the truth typically. You don't get in trouble for lying. You get in trouble for telling the truth. You get paid to lie. To tell the truth, you go broke. Look at this YouTube channel. It doesn't make 10 cents. But you also feel, why should I bother and put any time in this unless I'm going to do something that I think is useful or good, or I'm building up to something good. Gail Goodwin, quote here, writing is mostly this is an anonymous quote. Writing is mostly creativity. Rewriting is mostly craftsmanship. Yeah, that's kind of how it works. With the first draft, you're just trying to get things down on paper. And then when you rewrite, you can work out, how you should punctuate it, make the sentences more concise, make it flow better. But the important thing is typically getting that rough draft down, because then it's easy to edit it later. Okay, Gail Godwin, she's a historian. Here's her quote. Good teaching is 1/4 preparation and 3/4 pure theater. Yeah, a good teacher, they make it emotional. They make it fun. They connect with the audience, the teacher, the students, whatever. But they also got to know the material. And a really good teacher knows the material well and makes it interesting and has insight beyond the book. Gail Godwin, she says, something is your vocation if it keeps making more of you. Yeah, that's a good quote, by the way, now I'm so sick of the word passion, but it is true that if you're doing something good, it energizes you, versus if you're just going through the motions to make money, you do it because you have to, but it's not energizing you. All right, Dorian Lau has a quote here. Good writing works from a simple premise. Your experience is not yours alone, but a metaphor for everyone's. Yeah, usually most things that are worth writing about or talking about are something that you feel would be relevant to the audience. The more relevant, the better. And that's the secret of being a good writer, is telling it, from your gut as true as you can, so that the other person feels it from heart to heart, if you will. Okay, James Frey quote. He writes about writing. The great rule of dramatic writing is conflict, conflict, conflict. Oh, what that's all about is if you're writing a novel, a story with some suspense or something, basically a lot of times the hero, the protagonist of the novel, it's good to kind of keep them in trouble. So there's suspense, there's drama. That has a tendency to make the reader want to keep on reading if they're reading a great book. For example, I'm reading Trinity about the history of Ireland, and Connor Larkin, the hero of the book, is a great guy. And he's always, in one disaster after another, which makes it kind of interesting. Okay, here's a quote by Samuel Delaney. Good writing is clear. Like, you can teach a person to write clear, but talented writing is energetic. Yeah, somebody who just has a knack for it, there'll be energy coming off the words. Good writing avoids errors, whereas talented writing makes things happen in the reader's mind vividly, forcefully. Yeah, so the same person who's good at telling jokes and stories is probably going to be a good writer, and somebody should strive for developing that to be a good writer, for writing stuff that's entertaining, that the audience likes. Okay, a good writer, let's see, who's this quote? I'm going to shrink this down a little bit here. This is coming from William Blundell. He wrote a book called Feature Writing. This guy was a professional writer, and it's a good book, Feature Writing. I read tons and tons of books about how to write better. Okay, so here's some quotes from William Blundell from Feature Writing. He says, a good writer knows it's vital to write the mundanes of his parts of his story tightly and simply so the reader can get to the good stuff. Yeah, keep the boring stuff as concise as possible and even get rid of it if you don't have to. The writer achieves this by never explaining more than the reader absolutely needs to know at that point. Readers prefer people to places over things. People like people, and they like them best when they're moving or acting. Yeah, so it's kind of like, people like a painting of people doing something more than they like a landscape painting. Yeah, and like in the old books, Victorian age novels, they'd have a tendency, too much descriptive stuff. We call that purple prose, compared to people want to get to the action, the people, fast in a story. Okay, here's other comments he has. Don't put too many numbers in your writing. It's real boring. When you're listening to a story, if you were talking to a friend, you wouldn't use all these numbers. Our mind's not good. Numbers are abstract, so it's hard to picture them. So minimize numbers as much as possible when you're writing prose. And don't be too long on the attributions. If you're giving your thesis presentation for your PhD, you have to kiss butt a little bit and, spell out every professional detail and how great all your mentors and professors were. But if you're writing something to entertain an audience that doesn't care about that, then be brief on it. Put what's necessary, but be brief. Okay, this guy Noah Lukeman wrote a very good book called Dash of Style. He wrote another good book too on writing called The First 5 Pages. I think he's a professional editor, so he's very good. Readers want strong arguments and strong opinions. They don't like writers who play it safe. Readers yearn for confident prose. Yeah, basically, being wimpy and polite, it stinks for a writer. It's like somebody telling a story, or a comedian. If a comedian's wimpy and polite, they stink, And who wants to read, lukewarm mishmash, If you got something to say, say it. If you don't have anything to say, then don't say anything. So yeah, a good writer is strong and confident. My experience is the most common BS books that they just kind of keep promising you something and they never deliver it, or they just start going in circles in the first couple paragraphs and they don't get to something good. So I can usually tell if the writer knows what they're doing or not. A good writer gets to the point quick, surprises you, tells you something useful on the first or second page. Okay, Jeffrey Hatcher, he's a guy who wrote a book called The Art and Craft of Playwriting. He says, concrete goals are better than abstract ones. Positive goals are better than negative goals. Yeah, and I think that's the sense that everybody's got kind of a rough life. And in a sense, a novel is a little bit of an escape. It's also something that you can identify with, but in some ways it's an escape too. So they like to have something positive, some hope in there. He also repeats, this is pretty standard in all writing classes or books, always keep your hero in trouble. Nabokov used to say you should always get your hero up in a tree and start throwing rocks at him. Okay, the most memorable dramatic characters are likable. Yeah, there should be a likable protagonist in the story because you have to identify with somebody in the book, otherwise why read it? If I don't think there's somebody who I like or admire or I can learn something from, I'm not going to keep reading the book. Okay, Anonymous. Writing is like sex. First you do it for love, then you do it for your friends, then you do it for money. Now, that quote's been attributed to a whole bunch of people, and I don't know who really wrote that quote, so I just put it as anonymous. Okay, Anne Lamott, good writing is about telling the truth. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why you like a writer who you think is good, because you feel like they're telling you the truth rather than all the standard BS you hear all the time. Okay, Brad Bradbury, the guy who wrote Fahrenheit 451, this is from the afterword of that. Digression is the soul of wit. Take digression from Hamlet, and what have you got? Yeah, and again, you feel it in your gut. If it would make a smart friend laugh, or be useful to them, then it's worth putting in. All right, I'm Steve Wright. He's a good comedian. He says, I'm writing a book. I've got the page numbers done. That's kind of like the Oscar Wilde quote, I'm writing a poem. This morning I added a comma. This afternoon I took it out. Okay, J.G. Ballard, English novelist. Any fool can write a novel, but it takes a genius to sell it. Now, that's true, too. Anybody can self-publish a book on Amazon. It's real easy to do, and that's a good way to do it because you can self-publish a book for free. But the downside is it's real difficult to market it unless you're good at that, So the marketing is the hard part. Writing the book's the easy part in terms of just getting it down on paper. Okay, Andre Morat, this French writer, he says, almost all great writers have it as their motif, passage from childhood to maturity, the clash between the thrill of expectation and the disillusioning truth. Lost Illusion is the undisclosed title of every novel. Okay, lost illusion, yeah, that's a big thing, letting people know what's the truth about dealing with some situation. But of course, redemption is a big one. Look at Scrooge. He was redeemed in Christmas Carol. Look at Jean Valjean in Les Mis. He was redeemed in that, and I love the bishop too. He says, you are forgiven. I have bought your soul for God when he gave him back the candlesticks. That was an incredible scene. And the musical, the 1985 soundtrack, I think is the best musical ever. Okay, Andre Morat continues, writing is a difficult trade which must be learned slowly by reading the great authors, by trying at the outset to imitate them, and then by daring to be original. Yeah, it's like a Renaissance painter. They learn by imitating the great masters, and then they're able to start adding their own touch to it. And the other thing is, in writing, you'll almost never see anybody who can write well that's young, because it's a long skill to learn in the sense that to get really, really, really good, time helps. You get more life experience. You get more understanding of people. Also, nice thing about writing is you get better at it as you get older, as long as you don't have an ischemic brain. So you can keep on improving it. There's not like a ceiling. You can only get so good, let's say, at a sport. you're only going to run 100 meters so fast. And you're going to get slower and slower typically after 30, 35. So you're just going to go downhill after that. Versus riding, you can keep going uphill as long as you're doing things right and getting good blood supply to your brain in your 50s and your 60s and your 70s. You can keep getting better. A lot of masterpieces were written by authors in their 70s, even 80s. Okay, James Kilpatrick. Style is important, but content comes first. Yeah, and Tom Wolfe said something about that. Like when he was a young guy, he thought style was the most important thing. But as he got older, he realized it was about 75% content and about 25% style to make really good writing. And I'll know, like, let's say I want to write a book chapter on something. What makes a book chapter good is if I got something interesting to say about that. Yeah, and then, throwing in fun style helps, but... Okay, Iris Murdoch, good writing is full of surprises and novelties. Yeah, that's how I know a writer is really good or really smart, is if they surprise you. Because I've read so many books. I read hundreds of books every year. Most of the time, they're kind of boring and I already know it, and I'm just kind of going through it, looking to see if there's anything a little bit good. So when a writer starts surprising me, making me laugh, coming up with really good metaphors, then I know I'm onto something really good, and then I'm enthusiastic to keep going with the book. Okay, here's a quote from Joan Didion. Writing nonfiction is more like sculpture, a matter of shaping the research into finished writing. Yeah, basically you got a whole bunch of content and you got to keep on working until you fit it to the length or the time of a lecture, the length of the desired chapter, and just put the best stuff in there. Okay, Joseph Conrad, he's the guy who wrote Heart of Darkness. Here's a quote by him about art and great writing. A work that aspires to the condition of art should carry its justification in every line. Fiction, if it at all aspires to be art, appeals to the temperament. A story is a conversation between equals. We keep reading because we continue to feel respected by the writer. The writer must show causality, how things are connected. Causation is what creates meaning. Yeah, I feel like when you're reading a book, you have to buy it. You have to feel it's authentic. You have to feel the author is correct and they know what they're talking about. If I read somebody who, sometimes like I'll read a book of one of these low-carb guys, or one of them, I forgot his name. He wrote a book about atherosclerosis, one of these low-carb guys who promotes meat diets, carnivore diet, and all this nonsense. And I wrote it because he actually is a smart guy, and he made a couple things. I think his name was Malcolm Kendrick, all right? And he is a bright guy, and he did have some good, interesting things to say about atherosclerosis. But then he so-called, jumped the shark, and, once he got past about halfway in the book, then he started saying all types of stuff that I thought was not correct. And I know a lot about atherosclerosis, so I'm like, I couldn't read the book anymore when he started trying to say good things about meat with regard to atherosclerosis. I wasn't buying it. All right. But the other stuff that he said early in the book, first half, was actually surprisingly good. Okay, Anton Chekhov quote, great writing is audacious, original, concise, compassionate, truthful. And that's part of it too. You respect the author who has enough courage to tell you the truth about something that is not easy to tell the truth about. Okay, this one here is the next couple ones are from Jorge Luis Borges. The microscope and telescope are extensions of sight. The telephone is an extension of voice. The book is an extension of memory and imagination. Yeah, a book is a great thing. It's like a conversation with an author from potentially hundreds of years ago, even over 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. And it's the condensed summary of their best thoughts on that topic. Okay, all that happens to us, including our humiliations, our misfortunes, our embarrassments, all is given to us as raw material, as clay, so that we may shape our art. If you think you might want to be a writer of some sort, it's good to keep a journal where or keep text files where you summarize, your emotions, your feelings about something big that happens to you. So if something big happens to you, write a couple pages on that, and that might be useful to you someday in the future to capture that moment, whatever it might be. Okay, Jorge Luis Borges, one more quote. If I were asked to name the chief event in my life, I would say it was my father's library. Yeah, that's a kind of a common thing. If a guy is lucky enough to have a father or a mother who really teaches them to read and encourages that really helps them. I've noticed that people who were emphasized to read the Bible when they were young, they end up being often quite really literary. Some of the most sophisticated, smartest people I know, had to read the Bible a lot when they were young. And a lot of the most intellectual people, they went through some phase during their childhood where they had to spend a lot of time alone, and they just read and read to, for their enjoyment or out of their loneliness, whatever, but they read a lot. Okay, like you look at Oscar Wilde, he was homeschooled, okay, and he's able to speak multiple languages, reading multiple languages as a young guy. Homeschool is the best way to educate a person. I don't even think it's safe to send your kid to public school anymore. And even the private schools, they're better than the public schools, but they're still not that good usually. Like the Catholic schools, they'll teach you a lot more about how to behave and be nice. They're much better for all that. But their education is just about the same lousy education as a public school. Homeschool is the best chance to get a good education. So anyways, having a parent that promotes education to a kid is like one of the best things to do to get the kid off to a good start. And the parents got to be role models. They got to see the parents reading. Charles Bradlaugh, without free speech, no search for truth is possible. Without free speech, progress is checked, and the nations no longer march toward the nobler life. Better 1,000-fold abuse of free speech than denial of free speech. The abuse dies in a day, but the denial stays the life of the people and entombs hope. Yeah, people got to be able to talk and speak freely, because how can you write something bold and daring and new and interesting that challenges the status quo unless you're allowed to speak freely? Okay, Nathaniel Brandon. Anyone who really loves you wants you to be authentic, and anyone who doesn't want you to be authentic doesn't really love you. Yeah, so anybody who doesn't allow you to talk, that means they don't like you. That means they don't respect you. So watch out for that. Most people that I've noticed think that the world likes them a lot more than it actually does. Albert Camus, always go too far, because that is where you will find the truth. Yeah, you just got to draw the line, but it's actually a good quote. Okay, L.P. Hartley, it is better to write about things you feel than things that you know about. Well, it's good to have both, to know it and to feel it. But yeah, when you feel something, that's the time to go. That's the time to make a video. Albert Camus, good intentions may do as much harm as malevolence if they lack understanding. Yeah, there's a lot of stupid people that basically just do whatever they're told. And sadly, they can be tricked into doing all kinds of awful things. And then later on, they just go, well, I was just following orders, Or that's what everybody was doing and thinking. Yeah, so stupid people can be dangerous if they're trained badly. That's why it's important that they got good guidance when they're young and even as they get older, because that's what they go by. They don't really think much independently. Mark Twain, substitute damn every time you're inclined to write very. Your editor will delete it and the writing will be just as it should be. Yeah, you want to go easy on the adjectives. That's a sign of a wimpy writer, too many adjectives. Earlier, we talked about getting good grades in school and college writing classes. And the way you do it is you write the way the teacher wants you to. And to some extent, you have to do that. Schools teach you to imitate. Oh, here's a quote from Robert. Well, actually, one quote on that one. I had one of my kids, and he was in college at the time. And he's taking a writing class, and he asked me to help him. So I helped him, and he wrote one thing about vegan diet for his teacher, who was this fat guy. And the teacher gave him kind of a bad grade. I think he got a B on the paper, and he thought he deserved an A. It was a good paper, and the kid did a good job with it. But I figured that was like the first paper of the semester, and so I figured he'd come back to me for the second one, and hopefully things would go better for that one. And the kid didn't speak to me the whole rest of the semester. I was real busy, so I didn't really pay much attention. And then later on, I found out that he got an A in the class. He was happy about that. And I'm like, well, who helped you? Who helped you with your grammar or proofread your papers and stuff? And he just started laughing. And it was his little sister who was in 8th grade. And I'm like, what is that? And he goes, sorry, Dad, but she's a better writer at the college level than you are. I'm like, what are you talking about? This little kid doesn't know anything. And he says, you don't understand, Dad. You don't think like a college professor. College professor is a big fat guy with diabetes. He's offended by you recommending a vegan diet. He says, his sister in 8th grade, she said, she thinks like a college professor. And I said, that says a lot more about your professor than it does about me. And that was kind of my experience with the writing class. So I was all enthusiastic to help the kid with writing, teach him how to write. And he didn't even want to talk to me, just his little sister. What a joke. Anyways, okay, Robert Pirsig from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Schools teach you to imitate. If you don't imitate what the teacher wants, you get a bad grade. Taking the essence of the instruction and going ahead with it on your own, that got you an A. But originality could get you anything from an A to an F. Yep. Okay, Anthony Burgess, the English writer, he says, if you write fiction, you are in a sense corrupted. There's a tremendous corruptibility for fiction writer because you're dealing mainly with sex and violence. These remain the basic themes. They're the basic themes of Shakespeare, whether you like it or not. Okay, Nietzsche. Truth serves life. All things are subject to interpretation. With interpretation, whatever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power, not of truth. Yeah, now that's a big statement, and that's one that a lot of people just can't handle that. There's a good quote by Carlyle. He said, "There's always a good reason, and then there's a real reason." So very often the way a lie is pushed onto the public is that they're just forced to accept it, or they're given some BS soft reason that only a dummy would believe. Most people are stupid, so they believe it. But part of being intelligent is your default setting should always be skeptical, and then you don't go off of that unless there's good reason to be convinced about something. But more often than not, whatever you're hearing is BS and nonsense. All right, another couple brief quotes by Noah Lukeman, the guy who wrote A Dash of Style, and he also wrote The First 5 Pages. Really excellent books. Those are some of the best books on learning how to write. So here it is. Writing is cumulative. The discerning reader notices when you repeat something. Reading is a cumulative experience. As the reader progresses, he unconsciously stores in his head all the words in your manuscript. Unintentional repeats of a phrase are called echoes. Echoes to the discerning reader will take their toll. A character's full name should probably only come once or twice in the entire book, if at all, and only when first introducing him. All right, so what that means, like let's say you're writing a book. You really want to finish the book and then have all your energy up to edit. And you want to start, like let's say on a Saturday morning and go all the way to the end of the book. Let's say finish Sunday evening. Because if you do it all in continuity, that final edit, you'll hear all these echoes and you can remove them. Because if you just do it part by part, one chapter at a time, a lot of times you'll forget it. That's another thing too why you got to be careful if you try to dictate a book, is that when you're speaking, you have a tendency to make more repeats than you will if you're writing. You're more aware of what you're doing when you're typing it out than you are when you're speaking it. Okay, the idea of literacy. Just being able to read is passive literacy. It enables you to follow what someone else has written. Writing is active literacy, something you could do. Public speaking is a form of active literacy. It enables you to communicate well with others. But then there's steps well above that, what I would call high literacy. High literacy is the actual goal of an intelligent person, to develop advanced skill in reading, writing, oratory, and thinking. So basically, low-level passive literacy is like the average American. They can read a street sign when they're driving. They can read a real simple thing, push the on switch or something. And you'll need about passive literacy to train people to do simple minimum wage jobs, all right? But you want to move to a higher level of passive literacy, and you want to keep on moving into active literacy and then high active literacy. High active literacy means you can quote the best authors or the best experts in your field. You are, articulate when you discuss a topic in your field within one of your domains that you're experienced in. And you want to get to that point of high literacy. It's sort of like, why not go through life with it? And anybody could develop it. They simply have to want to do it. And I saw that as a big difference in education of people, is that if you're just trying to go through the motions to get your tickets, stamped so you can move to the next level to make money, then you're only going to do the minimum. But if you really want to learn and be educated and be well informed and be articulate, then you make the effort. And that's a huge thing that's not automatic. A person can have a real high IQ but have very little intellectual ambition or motivation. If you learn to write well, you will distinguish yourself. It takes about a year of serious practice to learn to write reasonably well. Of course, you want to read a lot, because then you're swimming in words. Okay, here's a quote from Tom Clancy, the famous writer. Whenever somebody comes up with a good idea, there's somebody else who never has had a good idea in their life who stands up and says, oh, you can't do that. Yeah, there's always going to be people who are putting you down. That's why it's good to be a little bit of an egomaniac and a little bit stuck up, because the world's always going to criticize you and knock you down and try to beat you down and tell you you stink. So you have to be kind of confident, and maybe more confident you should be, but you have to be if you want to be good. All the guys I know who are great, they're always like, why not me? Why not me? And I think you got to be that way. Most of us. Okay, I guess that's it for this one. So anyways, hope that was useful or interesting.